Hello and welcome back to Talking Tactics. On today's episode, we sit down with Aldo Kane. Aldo, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
How are you this morning, mate?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Good. I'm going to start with our first Talking Tactics question we ask every guest. If you had to choose one thing you do above all else to support your mental health and well-being, what would it be and why?
It's a good question. It's hard to put it into like one thing. If it was to be only one thing, it would be to be outdoors as much as possible and disconnected from screens. But really, all of the stuff to do with how I manage my mental health is a bit of a stack, but it's pretty much all free. It's being outside, social ecosystem. So my close relationships, that's directly related to and predictive of resilient outcomes and a resilient life. But sleep, exercise, nutrition, getting all the basics right for me is a good foundation to be able to go out and do hard things that tax me mentally, physically and emotionally and still be able to bounce forward from them as opposed to bouncing back.
Yeah. I'm with you. I mean, I expected an answer like that. And I think there's a lot in that for the listener. I obviously know who you are, and all the guys who we've been chatting, and we all know who you are. But if there's anyone listening who doesn't know who Aldo Kane is, can you give us a brief intro as to who is Aldo Kane?
I joined the Royal Marines at the age of 16, and I spent 10 years in the Royal Marines as a sniper. I then left, and for the last 16 years, been working exclusively in television and film, providing safety, sort of technical safety and consultancy work for high risk, high consequence filming jobs, whether that's with narcos in jungles in South America or whether it's getting Will Smith into an active volcano in the South Pacific or anything in between that. So I've spent the last 30 years really operating in extreme remote hostile locations. And I suppose that's taken me all over the world, well over 100 and odd countries, and pretty much every environment on Earth.
I'm only a little bit jealous of that. Wow, that's quite some experience. Take me back to the start though, because I'm interested in the why. Why did you join the Marines at 16? What was the inspiration?
So I joined at 16, but I was actually training to join from when I was about 13, which is mad when I think about it. For me, I grew up in Kilwinning in the west coast of Scotland, and, I wasn't academic at the time in any way. I wanted travel, I wanted adventure. And so the armed forces was a real option for me, a way to get out. The other options were, factory work, and a lot of my mates from school are still working in the same place when they left. But for me, it was like I had a burning desire to travel, to have adventure and to test myself. The rest of it, I went up to the careers office at Queen Street in Glasgow, and obviously you're trying to get poached by the Army, the Navy and the Air Force. And the Marines appealed to me. Just, I looked at the brochure, it looked pretty cool. There's guys in the jungle, stood looking alley. And it was also the longest and the hardest one. So I figured, for me, that would be where I'd start. And, if I failed that, I would do something else. But, there's probably a bit of a public service announcement in that, you become what you think about, whether that's consciously or subconsciously, that becomes your reality. And from the age of 13, I made my first ghillie suit when I was 14, I think, and I was cutting around up the forest, up the back of our house. Probably get arrested for that now. But for me, I wanted to be a sniper from that age in the Royal Marines. I didn't just want to get in the Royal Marines. I wanted to become a sniper. And that was about how good must you be as a soldier, as a fieldcraft operator, to be able to operate on your own. And that courage in my own convictions, really was a big motivator for me. So it was kind of like doing training was difficult, but it was never a question in my mind that I would pass or not. It was just, that's what I was going to do.
Tell you what fascinates me about that is it's so rare to have someone have that level of direction and know exactly what you want to do. I still don't know what I want to do. And you knew from 13, and I guess that's why you've been so successful, because you've been so driven.
That drive though is it's innate in me.
Yeah.
But once you start to understand what motivation is, how motivation works, and how you can stack that with discipline, almost anything is achievable. So what do I mean by that? So like I was intrinsically motivated to pass that course. There was no social media at the time.
Yeah.
I wasn't doing it to get praise from my dad. No one in my family was in the military. I really didn't care about everything outside. I was motivated internally to do that. When you're motivated extrinsically outside by likes, subscribes, all this social media stuff that we've got now, or recognition, promotion, pay rise, when things get difficult, those foundations aren't strong and they crumble pretty quickly. So, it's not hard, especially in this day and age, it's not hard to excel in any subject if you're even a little bit motivated, because the majority of people do not want to take the hard road. The majority of people want stuff instantly, and it's not necessarily their fault, because a lot of the young ones have been brought up with social media, super fast, broadband speeds, and smartphones. So we have this like instant gratification. To go and do the longest, hardest infantry training in the world is not something that you pass overnight. It's 6-7 months of hard work to get through that. So, but when you have that intrinsic motivation in the first place, almost anything is possible. It's just a matter of time, and if you can extrapolate that out and you think, all you've got to do is this thing on this day, get that done, then concentrate on tomorrow, do that, you're on the way.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, especially with those points you're making in regards to, I think a lot of us are we focus probably too much on the noise, that external validation, as opposed to focusing on the internal. Take me back to your training though as a sniper. What did that teach you about discipline?
I suppose, the Royal Marine Sniper course is, you have people coming from all services to do that. It's highly regarded as probably one of the best training in that field in the world. But it's no one shouting at you. You've got to do a selection to get on it. You've got to pass that. You've got to have the aptitude. Because it doesn't suit everyone, even though it looks Gucci and cool and all the rest of it. Working on your own or in a pair, sort of on your own and under your own steam doesn't suit everyone. So I think, there was a little bit of, I was already that type of person, which is a good point, right? Like we spend, you read all these self-help books that are telling you how to sort out all your weaknesses. But what I did was, I knew my strengths and I leaned into them, and it's much easier to push it against an open door than it is to try and bolster all the things that you're shit at. And so that, for me, I already had that character that suited that role. And the training is, it's 2-3 months long. And for me, it wasn't about the shooting. And it never has been. I was just fascinated by how can someone move around in, when I was thinking about it, before I joined up, it's like, how does someone move around behind enemy lines, like all, under their own esteem, and like what sort of confidence does that person need to have? So for me, it was much more about that and taking all the field craft stuff to the highest level that you possibly can. And, it's probably, when I look back in my career, that course is probably one of the best things that I had done. And it taught me, I suppose, supreme confidence in being able to get this to the skill level that I needed to get to. And if you can do that, you can apply that anywhere in life. The same with any, armed forces training. It teaches you self-confidence and discipline. And discipline in a lot of walks of life in the military, if you're not disciplined, then things fall through the cracks and people ultimately can die from it. So that's why discipline for me has been like a cornerstone. It's everything. Motivation is one thing. To be motivated to do something is one thing. But when it's cold, wet, scary, whatever, then it's discipline that makes you do the things that you need to do. I guess it's that bit of moral courage, isn't it? Doing the right thing when it's the hardest thing to do, and especially when nobody's watching. That piece there is discipline. That comes down to, can you do the thing that you need to do in the moment that needs to be done, even though you don't feel like doing it?
I think that's why I chose that question, because I'm with you on that train of thought that I think we often talk about motivation. We have like motivational speakers, and it's great to have motivation, but really you are right. It's discipline that gets you through something like that, or when you're on the battlefield or anything in life where things get really, really difficult. Yeah. It is discipline that gets you through.
Well, it's just, if you've got a room full of idiots and you motivate them, you've got a big problem.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. You said you served for 10 years, did you?
Yeah.
Are there any experiences or chapters of that phase of your life that you reflect back on that were like really life-changing? I get the whole 10 years would have been incredible in terms of developing who you are today and developing self-confidence and all those experiences. But is there any like big moments?
Yeah, I think training was obviously one of the biggest moments in my life. It's kind of set out the blueprint for who I am now and what I do now. I've never had a job, like a normal job, as people would see it. I've always had my identity wrapped up in the thing that I do that pays me money, which is quite tricky when that thing ends, because, it's the same as sports people and things like that when they retire from rugby or football. But I think training was the first thing that I had ever done that I realized, what I was capable of. Yeah. And also that there was no sort of dark art to it or sort of black magic. It was literally a process. And it's the first time that I realized that, if you're here and you need to get to here, there is a route map there. Even if no one's ever done it before, you can break that down and do these small things, and you can achieve great things. So I think training was a big one because it's shaped who I am today. Obviously I can't hit a barn door now with a rifle, and my face isn't as good as what it was then, but the commando spirit sticks with me to this day. I'm 47 now, and I can tell you, like, courage, determination, unselfishness, cheerfulness in the face of adversity. That's why I get asked back on jobs by people like Will Smith, James Cameron, or Darren Aronofsky, or people in the film and TV world, because of that part of it. Not because of I was a commando. It was because of that ethos, those values there. And I think probably latterly going to Iraq in 2003 as a sniper in Lima Company 4-2 Commando probably had a sort of what would you call it? An exponential or a super leveraged effect on me personally for lots of different reasons, and ultimately in the long run, very positive. But because it was the first time, it's the first time I'd gone to war. It's the first time that I had been involved in what I'd been training for 10 years. And I think just what you see, what you do when you're at war, can have an outweighed effect on the rest of your life, both positive and negative. And for me, that, when I came back from there, the thing that I struggled with most was not the classic sort of someone with, post-traumatic stress disorder. It was much more like, shit, this is all that I have left. It was a realization that I wasn't 25 and bomb-proof. I was, you see firsthand that you're not invincible. And that, that there's, to me then, that was like, I need to make the most of my life going forward. And I think, ultimately, I know a lot of people that have spent many years in Afghan, Iraq, and all the other venues around the world that we've been scrapping in. And I would say that ultimately the long forecast, the long trajectory of people is one of resilience. And it's, it is the norm in a lot of cases, is that, what you feel in the first month, 2 months, year, 2 years, 5 years after something like that can have a big effect on your life negatively. But overall, once you find the mechanisms and things to cope with it, you sort of move from that trauma into post-traumatic growth, which is actually really common in lots of people, in lots of different, paramedics, doctors, those sorts of things. So I think those two parts of my military career, although it was short in comparison, my twin keeps calling me a sprog. He's my twin brother's in the Marines, Aldo Kane, and he's been a PTI for, I think he was saying 26 years.
Wow.
So he's obviously called me a sprog, and he's done more time in the NAFI queue than I did in the Corps. But, I think, for me joining up in passing that, and then obviously the time at the end, I was like bookended, my short career was bookended by doing the thing that, everyone trains for.
Post-traumatic growth is not something I've heard of before, but I like the sound of that. One word you mentioned throughout that was identity, and I assume when you left the military that would have had an enormous impact on your identity or your thoughts around what your identity represents. And I know that is similar for lots of people who leave the military. What challenges did you face when you did leave?
I think, to put it into context, all I ever wanted to do was be a sniper in the Marines from a very young age. And at the age of 25, 26, the same thing that drove me into the Corps, quest for adventure, to challenge myself mentally, physically, and emotionally, was the thing that dragged me out of the Corps. And I was at odds with myself because I had something deep in my gut that was telling me that I needed to get out. I kind of felt like I'd already done the war bit. I felt like life was too short and I didn't want to, go back and do that again. But I was working against myself because it's all I wanted to do. And I was here at, as far as I could see, at the top of my game there. And, obviously you could go through promotion and spend the time there, but there was an itch that needed scratching. And I put my chit in to leave, not knowing why I was doing it or what I was going to do. But the drive was so strong that every day that I was doing the stuff in the Corps was sort of working against me. The best thing I ever did was join the Corps. And in hindsight, second best thing I ever did was leave after a good amount of time, because I wouldn't have got into what I do now. But yeah, the challenge was, I lost everything that was made me Aldo Kane. I left being a sniper for Lima company, and then within 6 weeks, I'm selling gas and electricity with no backup, no lads.
Really?
Yeah. And I bounced from shit job to shit job over like 3 years. Wow. And it's, I had to go and do an interview for this gas and electricity job where I had to do the birdie dance in front of 4 people that were interviewing me. I'd just been shat on down my face in suit by a seagull. I was up in Dundee. and then come into
that
this.
That is a challenge.
Yeah. And then come in, and it was so degrading. But I was like, I need work. But I was doing that for 6 weeks, commission only, knocking on doors, selling gas and electricity.
Wow.
Didn't make a penny. In fact, I was down because I was paying for my fuel to get to these locations to hassle people to change their gas and electricity over. And it was incredibly difficult. I often say that I talk to my brother and I'm like, when you're in the Corps, you go into a bar or you go into a conversation or a meeting or a networking event, even though you're on your own, you have like the Corps behind you.
Yeah.
That's part of who you are. And then here you are, you're just Aldo Kane. You're just a guy going round in a shit-looking suit trying to sell gas and electricity. Yeah. There's no backup. There's no, there's no foundations there. So that, like, I did 2 or 3 of those jobs that I found so destroying and demoralizing. And at the whole time, the Corps and the rest of the military were, out in Afghan, doing the job. And I just found it incredibly difficult to not go back in, because the easiest thing for me to do was to join back up and get back in, go out doing what I'd trained for. But like I said, that urge, that gut feeling that something was out there, I didn't know what it was yet, but something was out there that I could get my teeth into, and that would give me the same purpose, satisfaction, life satisfaction that I got from the Corps. And so I, at the time didn't know, I was into the outdoors. I'd spent a lot of time in the Corps doing AT. For the first part of my time in the Corps, we weren't doing very much. So I was very much into AT, climbing, paddling, mountaineering, doing all that sort of stuff, diving. And I started working offshore, and working offshore actually allowed me time. I was getting paid well, so I was doing 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. When I was working offshore is like the biggest lark out there. Anyone that tells you they work in an oil rig and they're like covered in oil rags and they're working 18-hour days is utter nonsense. you spend, I'll probably get shit for that, but you spend more time in the tea shack talking about the job than you do out doing the job. But that gave me like a huge chunk of time every night. And every day you just had hours. So I would read and read and read about adventures, and I redid my standard grades and my GCSEs. And I just started really I hadn't really read much in the way of any books of literature before I left the Corps. When I got back from Iraq, the answers that I was trying to find, I literally couldn't read enough books. Sometimes I would do all-nighters reading books. Wow. And that was obviously how I was dealing with it and coping with it. But I used the time offshore to basically start learning about the world. And when I was back from offshore and those 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, I was going out to Chamonix, I was going climbing, I was going to South America. I started leading expeditions. I actually started leading expeditions in my leave from the Marines when I was like 24, and 23, 24. So essentially what happened is all of these things were coming together. I didn't know where it was going to go at this point, but the point being is when you've got time and you've got a bit of money from doing the job, you can get your head above the parapet. And you can see what opportunities are out there. And that's exactly what happened. After 3 years of being on the rig, I came home, I had a phone call to speak to someone at the BBC who was like, we need someone to get a team inside an active volcano. By the way, it's in the Congo and it's a bit spicy down there. That was it. Everything that I'd been doing over the last 13 years had basically brought me to that one phone call, that one point where I had time, an inclination to be able to take that job.
I think you just answered my next question of how did you find your path into adventure and television? And I'm assuming that was it.
Yeah, that was it. So, it's tricky because, I left the Corps and you think you're Billy Big Bollocks, you've done all this amazing stuff. You've got confidence of 10 men as you do it, 25, 26. I've probably got less confidence in myself outwardly now than I did at that time, but I've done way much more. So I think, the more you do, the more humble you get, or you should get. But anyway, it served its purpose. And I got a phone call asking if I could take a film crew inside an active volcano in the DRC. I obviously said yes. I had no idea about volcanoes or how dangerous they were. But what I was at this point was a rope access supervisor from offshore. I had a load of safety training because that's all we do offshore. So I could risk assess situations, kit, equipment, jobs really well. And I also in the background had all of my civvy, mountaineering, climbing, ropes, all these tickets that I'd just been working on over that 3 years. So I went to the Congo. I took another ex-Marine down there, Mike Francis, and we went down there and we basically rigged the entire volcano, biggest lava lake in the world, rigged it, got down inside it, took two very famous Nat Geo photographers down inside it and a BBC film crew. And so we did that job. I got everyone in safe and got everyone out safe. There's a couple of incidents with sort of rebel groups and that sort of stuff while we were down there. But the long and short of it is that I had time and inclination and I had been generally going in that direction, but I had time to see the opportunity, because if I was doing any other job, I would have been so busy I wouldn't have been able to. I'd be like, I wouldn't have taken the call. And then what that allowed me to do was then go down there, do the job, come back, and I just like at the same. That was the reason that was dragging me out of the core. I didn't know it at the time, but that was the thing that then shaped the rest of my life, and it's everything that I wanted from the core. And now this was my opportunity. So I got back from there, and I did what I did with the core. I was like, this is the end state. I want to be the best provider of these services in the industry. How'd I get there? Gap analysis, right? Where you're shit at diving. So you need to get all of that up to like supervisor level. Same with climbing, med training. So I just did that. I did that one job and came home and just changed my entire like outlook of where I was going. Set up my company and just went straight into it with the same gusto that I did when I turned up at Limston on day one.
I love that. So that was your first like job in television, and you've obviously done a lot since. You've done a lot in extreme environments. What are your most dangerous or memorable expeditions that you've done?
So I guess in TV wise, I've exclusively been doing only that for 16 or 17 years now. I've been inside 6 or 7 active volcanoes, one while it was erupting while I was in there. We've been chased out of various countries in South America by narcos who we were filming with Foxy. I've taken Will Smith into several places around the world. I've worked with James Cameron exploring the seabed and everything in between, and just finished doing a Big Apple series recently, trying to find and film 6 of the rarest animals on Earth, undercover sort of operations, filming operations down in Southeast Asia, trying to expose illegal wildlife trafficking rings. And then probably 16 or 17 world first expeditions, climbing Tepuis, rode across the Atlantic, climbed Everest, climbed Lhotse. That's just, it feels like I'm bragging there, but
I was going to say only a few there, only a couple.
But ultimately, that is, it's a blueprint of like what happens when you get the stack right. When you're intrinsically motivated, me, by the outdoors, by people, by curiosity, and you stack curiosity, passion, purpose all together, and then you're allowed to work in an environment that's, that allows you autonomy and mastery of whatever your thing is, then it's just a magical place to be. Now, I'm not saying that it's been plain sailing. I did the first job and then I didn't do any other work in TV for like 9 months. Then I took Helen Skelton up Salisbury Cathedral Spire for Blue Peter, and then it was like another job. And so when people see me on television, that overnight success took probably, 8 years of graft and doing 2 other jobs in between, still running rope access, doing wind turbine blade cleaning and repairs and cleaning up oil and pigeon shit and all sorts of stuff. But ultimately, it's that ability to have the portfolio sort of jobs that allowed me to stay in the TV game, because if you were just relying on that solely, it's funny, when I started doing this, there was only me and 2 or 3 other people that were doing it. You go on Instagram now and anyone that's climbed anything is now a safety advisor for for TV and film, but the work isn't there. The truth is they might get one job and there might not be anything for another year or 2 years. So I feel incredibly lucky that I was at the start of when that tide was rising. And, I was on, for the best part of the last 10 years, I've been on back-to-back expeditions and trips around the world, filming. And for the last 7 or 8 years, it's been on camera. So it's been an amazing journey. But what it has given me is like a deep insight into, I guess, like my human performance in extreme, remote, hostile locations.
So before you went down that road and all those experiences you've had afterwards, there must have been, you don't strike me as a particularly anxious guy. There must have been some, I don't know, some fear slightly just before you do something that big. Because I know you had that great experience in the military, but then you're going to do something completely new like you've not done before. Was there any anxiety? Was there, how did you prepare for that mentally?
So there's 3 stages of any operation. You prepare, then you perform, and then you recover. Preparation is key for all of it. So I'm not an anxious person.
You don't strike me as it.
And that's genetics in some respect, probably. It's, the life that I led in the military. It's, it's all of whatever it is, but I'm not an anxious person. I'll tell you about when I did give myself a anxiety panic attack, but it was probably granted. But I'm not an anxious person, and I probably put a lot of that down to the life that I lead. I'm active, I'm outdoors, I'm optimistic, I've got confidence in coping, and my ability to challenge or to appraise a situation as a challenge instead of a threat. That all impacts how your actual body processes stress. So, the first thing is to prepare, and when you sit down and do a risk assessment for taking 10 people into a volcano that's active and it's in a war zone, then you go through like almost every single eventuality, like up and down and left and right. And I find the process interesting because by the end of it, you know what gas is going to kill you. You know how it's going to kill you. You know how to protect against it and where that should be in the volcano. And so what you do is you end up, knowledge dispels fear. What you do is you take the wind out the sail of the fear or the anxiety. And then the things that are left are objective dangers. Rockfall, yes, that will kill you if you get smashed by it. If the volcano erupts when you're in there, yes, that will kill you. So there's those things, but what you've done is you've mitigated everything else. So it kind of removes the fear element from it. But yeah, sure, like you walk up onto the rim of a volcano that you've got to get people into, and there's a massive 700-meter wide bubbling cauldron of lava. Yeah, shit myself. Legs go, mouth dry, stop processing my food, all the other things that come with deep-seated fear. But the way I got through that, for example, so, I get to the top of the volcano, I'm like, bollocks, I've bitten off more than I can chew. I've taken this job because I thought it was Billy Big Bollocks from being in the Marines for a few years. And here I am about to take 10 people into an active volcano, and I've never even been on a volcano before. So I had to take myself off, had a word with myself because I was shitting myself. I was scared. And I was like, how am I going to get over this? I've got 10 people here and 100 porters. Just do something, Aldo, that you know that you can do. Let's get the tent set up. I know how to put tents up. Let's do that. Let's get the wets on. I know how to do that. And what you do is by doing these little things that you know you can do, you gain some semblance of control. So if you look at the things that cause stress, anxiety, the nuts factors, I can't remember who it was that came up with it, but novel situations, uncertainty, threat to ego or threat to life, and the sense of lack of control. When I was stood on top of that volcano, I had all of them. I'd never been on one before. It's loud, it's noisy, it's scary. And the big one for me, the biggest thing that made me fearful was the loss of reputation. And that is a real killer for people, you know, in everyday corporate world.
Yeah.
Or, you know, you make one bad decision after
100%.
30 years of working well, then, you know, that's completely undermined. Anyway, so how I got over that is I then started to chip away at the things that I knew I could do. What that does is it brings back some semblance of control to your life. Even if, you know, when we capsized mid-Atlantic, me and Foxy, you know, we're unsupported. There's no backup. The closest person to us is Tim Peake up in the space station for a nanosecond as he flies over. We're on our own. There's no cavalry coming to help us, and we're under the boat in a 30-foot wave at night in the middle of the Atlantic. What do? I mean, if you do nothing, you'll die. So what's the first thing you can do? Reach down, grab your harness, feel that you're underwater, you're holding your breath. You've still got the lanyards attached. That's fine. You can get back to the boat, pull yourself back to the boat, do the thing. What do I need to do next that's going to guarantee me living for another 1 minute? I need to get up and get air. Find the fiberglass part of the boat, pull yourself round, pull yourself up, breathe. What's the next thing I need to do? Who else is still here? And so for me, that taking action, having a bias to action is like the single biggest thing you can do. And I did feel, you know, slightly helpless. When I left the military, I felt slightly helpless, like I was sort of waiting, expecting all these jobs to roll in because I've just done this amazing thing. You know, I've served the country, I've done all this. And then you realize that you have to be the only person in charge of where you're going because things aren't going to come and land on your lap. And we have this, when you come from the military, it's hard because there's a process. You go from here to here, you do this course, you get promoted, you do that, your accommodation, that's done. You don't really need to be that motivated once you're in the system. You just need to follow the process. Whereas when you come out, if you don't have a plan, then you're going to become part of someone else's plan. And that's a problem. And so I felt kind of helpless and I was a bit pissed off and sort of like, when's this break going to come? And then I realized that you need to do exactly what I did in the volcano, exactly what I did in the capsize, is you need to do something. And your mood changes after you've taken the action. You don't wait to be happy before you then go and do a thing. You go outside, you exercise, you train, you go out with your family, and then the mood changes after that. So you've got to be proactive in the first place and take action to then have the downstream effects kick in.
I think one thing I take away from that is it's kind of that focus on you solve one problem at a time, isn't it? You focus on that, like you say on the top of the volcano, is that you get the tent up, or when you capsize, it's grabbing your harness. It's just you focus on the next problem.
You literally shooting crocs, the closest croc to the boat. That's the analogy Foxy and I use when we're talking about how hectic stuff is. And you know, the other thing is that this world that we live in is like, you know, everyone's busy. But there's a big difference between being busy and being productive.
Yes.
You know, we all feel good when we're being busy, but we're not actually being that productive. And multitasking does not work. You know, the brain cannot multitask. When you're doing 2 or 3 things at once, you're task switching. You're doing that for a bit, that for a bit, that for a bit. Yeah. And you leave a sticky residue in your brain from each task. You're not doing one thing. So, you know, to be able to, what I do is to focus on one thing, shooting that croc nearest to the boat, that's the thing I'm going to do for the next 3 hours. The next week, the next month is this thing. That's it. Everything else is noise. That gets cut out. And I think that sniper part of me is quite good at compartmentalizing that. And if there's a whole shitstorm going over here and I'm working on this thing, then I can park that. I'm not thinking about it. And actually, another tool I use is like a temporal audit, is to zoom out and go, actually, what matters here? That's how I basically work out my calendar for the week, is that if my schedule is getting so crunched and Fizz has to go, I'll be like, I'll look at it, I'll zoom out and I'll go, when I'm 60, the only thing that matters in this busy week is that I'm doing Fizz. Yeah. Because that meeting, that podcast, that thing isn't going to be, like in a year's time, it's not going to make any difference to anyone. So that's kind of how I prioritize those things. And ultimately, you know, I've just lost my sister and my mum in this last year.
Sorry.
And and basically what I've sort of taken from that is that all of the stuff, the busy stuff that we busy ourselves with, is good for keeping us busy, but it's not stuff that matters. The stuff that matters is the basics of exercise, nutrition, sleep, recovery, and social ecosystem, like your network of people that you're actually seeing face to face and getting out and doing cool stuff with.
Couldn't agree more with you. Going back to the TV work, one thing I meant to ask, working with people like James Cameron, you mentioned Will Smith, did you at any point have imposter syndrome? And what was it like working with them?
Working with them, I've worked with loads of big names over the years, Tom Hardy, Henry Cavill, Adrian Brody, all these guys, but I'm never sort of, I've always just taken it as, wow, it's amazing these guys want to work with me. That must mean I've got, some sort of interest or some sort of skill set that is useful to them. So I've never been blown away. And the more you work in this world, the more you realize that people are just people. Everyone's got their own worries. Everyone at the highest level of someone who you think has utterly made it has worries. They've got imposter syndrome. They've got stuff going on in their life. They're also important to other people. And as soon as you realize that everyone's the same, it kind of takes a wind out the sail of all of that stuff. But yeah, working with them is obviously great. And it's, this little lad from Kowinning that's working, taking Will Smith into a volcano or paddling with him down a river in Iceland. But ultimately people are just people. And the imposter syndrome, I've never had yet. I mean, if I get up and stand and talk to 500 people about whatever, there's a little bit of it. But then if I look sort of pragmatically at what I've done, sure, I've got insight that not very many other people have. So I'd say that the imposter syndrome for me is much more about being humble. I don't know. I mean, I do get it occasionally, but it's just part of. I think everyone gets it. I've spoken to loads of CEOs of big companies that are like, I have no idea how I got here. And you speak to people in the military, and they're now running entire commando units, and they're like, how did I get here?
How did that happen?
Yeah. But ultimately, the thing to realize is that everyone struggles. Everyone struggles at the highest level and all the way down to the lowest levels. Everyone's got their own stuff that's important to them and the stuff that's going on for them. So yeah, I probably do get it now and again, but I don't let it dictate what I do.
I think that's a great answer, and I think you're absolutely right. We all get it. Irrespective of where you fit in society, we all get it to some degree, don't we?
Yeah.
I want to do a bit on resilience and mental health. Conscious you've probably gone through a lot of this throughout our conversation so far, but do you have any lessons from the wild that somebody could apply to everyday life?
There's loads, isn't there?
Yeah.
Get off your screens.
That's the first one, yeah.
Yeah. Working in the wilderness is a great teacher. It's great. When I come back from a trip, say working in the jungle for 3 weeks, like my blood pressure's lower, my resting heart rate's lower, my eyesight's better. Like everything is just better because you're outside, you're living in the rhythm of, this sounds a bit woo-woo, but you're living in the rhythm of that landscape. And ultimately, what are the basics of life? Sleep, that's one. And I suppose sleep, exercise, and travel and people. And for me, I get all that. I'm doing a hard thing. I'm physically whacked when I'm doing the job. You're doing a first ascent up a big wall in Greenland. You're knocking your pan in for a 2-month expedition, day in, day out. But it's, you're working with purpose. And I find all of these things underpin resilience. Resilience. I've done, I work now and again with a professor, Andy McCann, who does, he's a professor in resilience and human performance. And I've done a couple of sessions with him, working with him, me delivering a talk and helping him. And he would say that resilience is, it's a moving target. and it totally depends on what you're doing in your life at that time. If you're working in a job that doesn't align with your values, and also you're not getting enough sleep and you've got stuff going on outside of work, that directly undermines your ability to deal with a stressor or a shit situation. So resilience, first of all, is a moving target. Someone isn't just resilient. You can be resilient in work. You can be a Royal Marine Commando, sergeant leading a troop into battle, and you're very fragile emotionally in a relationship with a significant other. So different sections of your life can be more resilient, less resilient. Different sections of your life longitudinally can be more resilient, less resilient. When you're younger, you may be more physically resilient, but less mentally resilient. At 47 now, I'm probably more mentally resilient than I was when I was in training, and less physically resilient if I get injured now. Yeah, I get injured when I'm in bed asleep. I don't know how it happens, but...
You and me both, yeah.
I'm waking up with like a neck tweak or, or like a rotator cuff injury from being asleep. So like that also, resilience changes over your life. And more often than not, when I've seen people come unstuck, it's not one big thing. It's not the big road traffic smash that they witnessed or were in. It's death by 1,000 cuts. It's, it's the work. It's the maybe a little bit of light bullying at work, not having enough money coming in at the end of the month. You might have a kid with a learning disability, or, it's literally all of these things that pile up outside social media comparison, the workload, and all of that piles up. And that's ultimately what is it's the final straw that breaks the camel's back. But lessons from what I've learned is that if you're getting outside, if you're exercising, if you've got good social network, and you're talking about stuff. The Foxy is a good mate of mine, and we speak to each other. I speak to Foxy more than my wife when I'm away, but we'll chat like 3 times a day.
Yeah,
and it's just a check-in. What are you up to? We'll have a chunter and a moan at each other. But that's like, you're just letting off a little bit of that pressure cooker, and not letting it, boil up till it's time to overflow. And certainly, from my life of working in extreme environments, I find that when I'm aligned with my passion, purpose, curiosity, I'm doing hard physical, mental, and emotional things, I find that keeps me on the straight and narrow. But the flip side to that is if you're doing too much of that and there's no recovery in there, then your resilience is undermined by a huge amount. Just having 2 hours less sleep a night, anyone that's got kids will know, or when you're on operations or you're whatever, then that totally reduces your ability to make a good decision, and especially a pro-social decision. If you look at making a moral decision on 3 nights of interrupted sleep, that goes out the window. So that recovery piece is huge. So for me, recovery and phys exercise are 2 non-negotiables.
Absolutely. If there is a member of defence personnel, whether they be military or not, listen to the podcast today, and they are facing adversity in whatever that means for them, have you got any advice? I get that it's specific to the situation, but
I get, and I understand it, and have plenty of, I've got so many stories of, mates that have been struggling, and, it's, I would say the first thing is that it's normal. We need to normalize it. Like, we live in an absolutely bonkers world. We've got nanorobotics that can go in your blood. We've got people going to Mars. We're talking about tiling the moon with solar panels. AI, like, are we going to have jobs in 15 years? Like, there's a lot going on now, more than the human condition body has ever had to deal with in all of its existence. And yet we have the same biology that, we were cutting around the plains with thousands of years ago. So our fear response and our mechanism for dealing with stressors was well adapted, back in the day, but it's not serving us that well at the minute. And we kind of spend most of our time in threat, fight or flight mode. But I would say the first thing to do is, I'm obviously not a psychologist and, this is just my viewpoint, but the first thing is to normalize it. Like, you're stressed because, one, that obviously matters to you, that thing matters to you, so that's fine. So accepting it, I'm stressed because this matters to me, this is important. And normalizing it, that, look at what you're doing, like your workload, your family, like all of this stuff. This is hard, and you're leaving, and you're just about to be promoted, demoted, moved to another country, war with another country. These are all things that create huge amounts of stress. So the first thing is to normalize it. And I would say as well is that, as an analogy, if I was leading a team of 10 people across an ice cap up in Greenland, and someone I found out had frostbite on their feet and was mildly hypothermic, and they didn't put their hand up and admit that, I can guarantee you that he or she is not the only one. It's the exact same with how we're feeling with stress and mental health. If one person in that organization is having these issues, it's the canary in the room that there is more, and there's actually, there's an issue there. So normalizing it and realizing that, you're not the only one. And then finding out what works for you. I mean, what are the things, the tools that people can use? I mean, you can decrease your workload, you can change job, you can move, you can get out of a toxic relationship. Having that bias to action. If you look at the happiest people in the world, they have agency, so a sense of control over their little part of life, and they have gratitude for the things that they've already got, instead of this hedonic treadmill of looking forward to all the things they can get and would like to get. So agency and gratitude are two things that make people happier. Normalizing it, doing something about it, finding out what works for them. I would also say, therapy is one of the best things that anyone can do. One of the biggest predictors of a resilient outcome is someone who's willing to put up the hand and say, I need help.
Yeah.
But that needs to be in an organization that has psychological safety. I work in some of the most elite, high-performing teams in high-consequence arenas around the world, and I would never at any point have a drama putting my hand up and saying, I don't know how to do this, I don't feel comfortable. And, you notice at that extreme high level with 5 or 6 people doing that vulnerability is a superpower.
100%, yeah.
As soon as you're in an organization where you get chastised for challenging, or you get chastised for contributing or raising your hand, or then that undermines resilience. It literally blows up the foundations of it, and you end up with a fragile workforce that can't do the job that they're there to do. I'll give you an example. We were skiing across an ice cap up in Greenland. We were inside the ping pong ball, so like it's a white out. Can't tell the difference between sky, feet, horizon. And we actually skied into the middle of a crevasse field. If we'd kept on pushing on, someone would have died in the down a hole. And so we stopped and had a conversation about it. And if you were sort of looking on the outside, you would think this team isn't working that well because they're challenging each other. And they're, I was basically saying we need to stop. And we need to wait until the mist clears so we can find a way out. But that is, the worst thing that you can have in a high-performing team is groupthink, where people just accept the norm, the status quo, and they don't challenge. But challenge really can only happen productively in somewhere with a psychological safety, where people feel that they can do that without being chastised. And when you're working in that sort of environment, then productivity is up. People feel more relaxed. Their mental health is better. I'm aware that was a bit of a ramble.
No, that was really good, and I appreciate it. That was a great answer. We're going to go into our quickfire round now, if that's all right. What is your favourite location you've worked in?
I really love the jungle. The jungle is, anyone that's been there, that's listening to this will know, it's just hard graft. And I think if you can work and operate, survive and thrive there, then you can do it anywhere on earth.
Scariest moment you've experienced?
It's been a few.
I can imagine.
That mild panic attack I told you about, I basically abseiled all the way down to the bottom of a volcano. I got off the ropes. There was no rescue team there, so if I spanked in, then that was probably it. It would have been a big operation to get me out. I got to the bottom of it, started talking to camera, and then felt my legs getting warm, which I, in my head, thought was a carbon dioxide sink, which I knew would kill me. And then I started talking up, the biggest lava lake in the world there and all the rest of it. Anyway, I talked myself into my panic attack, so I had to breathe my way out of it and talk my way out of it. So that was probably one of them.
Sounds it. One item you always pack?
That's a good question. One item I always pack is a knife, but I would say before that, the item that I always pack is my mindset for being in the field.
I can't imagine there's much left for you to do, but is there a dream expedition you'd like to go on?
Yes. I mean, there's loads. The more I do expeditions now and trips, the more I want there to be a purpose to it. We just finished filming an Apple series called The Wild Ones, and we were finding and filming 6 of the rarest animals on the planet to tell their story before they go extinct. And so I feel like, the expeditions that I've got left in me, I want to make a difference.
I love that. Finally, what's next for you?
So Foxy, Woody, Brian Wood, and Carl Hinnett, myself did a 500k Arctic Ultra race, raising money for SAFA, the Armed Forces charity, in March. Hardest thing I've ever done. I'm probably one of the shittest. Absolutely nails. But we did that in March, and that's going to be on Channel 4 in January. And that right there is about, it's not so much about doing the hardest ultra race on earth. It's more about masculinity, male vulnerability, what it means to be a bloke in 2025, 26. And I think, I just watched it a couple of weeks ago for the screening, and it is very moving. It's good.
I look forward to that. And we need more of that, I think, that message. Where can our listeners or viewers follow your work?
At Aldo Kane on all the social media stuff, but don't follow it too much on social media. Just 1 minute a day.
Dip in and out.
Dip in and out, yeah.
And finally, have you got a final message for the audience?
Yeah, I mean, as this is, about mental health and positive mental health, I would say that, we have to all take action and be proactive about absence of, a mental health issue doesn't mean mental health. It's something that I work on every single day, knowing that at some point I'm going to be called upon, and it's going to rinse my resilience supplies. So being proactive about it every single day, even when you feel like things are good, is making sure you do the things that are good for you, whether that's getting in a flow state, knitting, or climbing a big wall, social ecosystem. All of these things tie into it. And, I would just encourage people to spend more time outdoors with their mates doing stuff. It really is unbelievably good for you.
Couldn't agree more. Aldo, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you this morning. Thank you so much for giving your time to come and talk to us. I can only imagine the audience will get a lot from it. I know I have. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.